Hello, everyone, again. I just want to, first of all, welcome you to the Elliott Museum. We're so glad you finally made it, especially those of you who came from so far away today to see us. My name is Debbie, and it is absolutely our pleasure to present to you Miss Jane Lawton Baldridge.
Thank you, Debbie.
And Jane is really an internationally accomplished artist, and we are so fortunate to have her here in our community. And this room was recently repurposed for the sole purpose of really promoting the local talents and art community right here in Martin County and the Treasure Coast. So we have such a rich wealth of talent here, and we are very, very proud to be a showcase for that talent. So I know you're going to enjoy Jane's talk, but we hope you come back again and visit us, because every few months we're going to be changing this exhibit space out to feature local artists. And at the end of the month, we have a very special exhibit on the Highwaymen, the Florida Highwaymen, that's going to be downstairs in our main gallery. And that is going to be a very special show as well. So thank you, Jane, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all for being here. My goodness, I am touched and heartened and very nervous. So I've thought of several ways to start the conversation about how my art happened, how my yachting happened, and each leads kind of starts with a kernel that might be a tad dark, but then there's that aha moment when out of darkness comes sometimes great things. To work through a complication in your life, or an angst, or a strife, or a roadblock, sometimes you learn to leap taller buildings. And that seems to have been my path. And it's an extraordinary path, and it would depend on who the storyteller is, which way they took it. I prefer to take it as, holy wow, here I am, September 28th, 11:15 a.m., 2021, standing in front of you all at the Elliott Museum giving a talk about my solo show, which is a bit of a pinnacle moment in my career. All block, bold caps on the bucket list, if you will. And the fact that it was curated by a federal curator of renown, Alicia Weber, and what a delightful person to work with, and what a gift to the Elliott she is now and will be, and the entire Elliott staff and leadership embracing what I do and its connection to the community, a la water. So the town I grew up in, Seabrook, Texas, was surrounded by water. There was the bay, Galveston Bay on one side. There was the Seabrook-Kemah Channel on one side. There was the Clear Lake on one side, and there was Taylor Lake on another side, and then there were bayous feeding into it from all of Houston. So if it rained an hour north of us, even though it didn't rain in Seabrook, we often could have flooding. Because it was right next to Houston Ship Channel, which is at that time was the petrochemical universe of the world, it was also a very nasty place to live. And I, having been a devotee of Jacques Cousteau and National Geographic, and those kind of beautiful water images that they would serve up, was heartbroken that the places I wanted to sail and water ski and swim were a stew of nastiness. And so I would fantasize about ways to engineer cleaning up waterways like Galveston Bay from the sludge that was on top of their once sandy, beautiful bottom. I actually worked with a lady at our boat store who, as a child, remembered Galveston Bay being a crystal clear sand bottom water. So the want for that has been in me since I was a child. Some of the crazy opportunities I've had that many other yachtsmen or wannabe yachtsmen wish they had had. When I was 8, my father took a boat broker position with a company that wanted to sell off their sailboats and just sell motorboats. So he realized, being the smart man that he was, that the biggest impediment to a man wanting to buy his dream boat, sailboat, was his wife and family, because they were terrified. Because it's a big deal. First, the mystery of harnessing the wind and weather and waves and all those big sails flapping and running aground and motors going gone. And so his strategy when I was 8 was to take these people out with their families on the boats. These are 40 to 45 foot sailboats. And as soon as safely out of the slip, he would hand me the helm at 8 years old. And I would drive the boat out the channel and honk 3 times to get the bascule bridge to open and go out into the bay, and then he'd give the helm to somebody from the group wanting to buy the boat and send me up to hoist the sails at 8. What a great adventure. Somebody else might have looked at it like their father was using them for personal gain. But to me, it was building skill sets that I still use to this day. Getting exposed to sailors when I was 9, my parents traded me for a summer with my older cousin, and so I went to live with my aunt and uncle in Fairfield, Connecticut. And my uncle had a 14-foot board boat, and he, on the 3rd day I was there, was going to go off and race on big boats farther down Long Island Sound. And I, being the puckish child that I was, went and launched his board boat and set off down the Sound to look for these big boats. And when I found them, I was amazed and in awe and thinking, ooh, that's something I want to do. Not knowing that I was a 9-year-old female and that wasn't allowed. Or encouraged. But I found them, I sailed around them. My uncle was very proud to point out that there was his niece. I think everybody on the boat looked at him and went, how is she gonna get back? Does she know where she is? How old is she? So sure enough, they started their race and I sailed, headed back, and after about 8 hours of sailing, including the down and back, I had no clue where I was. And the sun was going down, and the tide had gone out. So those of you familiar with Long Island Sound know there are these big rock groins that stick out, so that I had to sail around them. And the wind was picking up, and the temperature was dropping, and I was a 9-year-old in a skimpy bathing suit. And I don't know that I would describe what I felt was fear, although I did talk to God a bit, as my predicament became more obvious to me that maybe it was a bit of a foolish move. But finally I decided that the worst thing that could happen is I'd be in trouble for taking my uncle's boat into the wrong beach, and that I really just needed to turn in one of the groins and sail and land and pull the boat up to safety and go knock on one of the doors of the houses on the beach and say, hi, I'm 9, I'm lost. Please help me. But that took me hours to come to the concept that that was even a possibility, because that's the way my life was. But once again, that's an amazing adventure, and seeing those big sailboats getting ready to take off on that race set a new goal in front of me. And it's these experiences that bore passion for both the water and sailing, and along this path, along came another realization, which was I didn't really fit in with my family or anywhere else. this painting here talks about being at my grandmother's knee or playing cards with her so that the rest of the family could go do whatever they wanted, because I was the youngest of 23 cousins, and by a long shot. The next one up was 8 years older. So they all went and did whatever they wanted to do, and sometimes that included coming back with photos of these beautiful sailing adventures, which made me salivate even more. But I also, without real stewardship or guidance, took it upon myself to decide my path. And my path, I decided, was going to include sailing, because you made magic. You could sail almost into the wind and make forward motion. How magical is that? You can't see the wind unless it's in a flapping sail or a tree or a flag, which later became one of my racing fortes, was to be able to tell the skipper where the wind was going to come from before it did, which comes from years of staring at the water and the sky and the sails and feeling it and hearing it and smelling it. But I realized that I wanted a path as a sailor and a painter, because they were non-traditional. I was not going to fit into a cubicle. I was not going to fit into a college degree. I was not going to fit into any of the typical molds. There was nobody who cared to tell me that maybe that was not a sustainable path or one that would really work out well for a female. But since nobody was there to tell me no, I just proceeded. My passion for the water continues to this day to be deeper and broader, and my concern for the pollution that I had as a young girl, it has obviously exploded exponentially over the course of my lifetime, and seeing what happens. There was a period in when I worked on Bald Head Island in North Carolina that they were talking about seismic testing and drilling for oil off the shore there, which is not too far from Cape Hatteras, which would be just a really bad idea because of the currents and the weather patterns and the right whales, which at one point we only had 450 of, and all these other things. And so I have been involved deep enough to write letters to the Bureau of Offshore Energy Management for the people I worked for, and also before I was 13, I used my own money to join Greenpeace and the Jacques Cousteau Society. So all these paintings come from that childhood passion that is just built and built like a volcano over time, and it's erupting, and here it is. And well, my studio is a mess because of it. And the sailing, thank God for the sailing. The first time I sailed offshore out of sight of land, I was a young teenager. I was not a happy camper. And all the angst of my land-based problems just melted away. And I became the best crew they could have imagined. Even for my diminutive size, I could stand my own using mechanical advantage to work with, side by side, what we used to call deck apes. 6'6", burly, young, strong men to race these sailboats. And I did it because I realized that the people that were winning were not only winning, but they were having a good time, because all the crew on board knew everything that had to happen, how it had to happen, when it had to happen, how to trim the sails, all the details. So you just work your passion, you learn, you work toward it till you get to that point. And that's how I got that gold medal in the back, was for 4 years I practiced, raced, 300 days a year. That meant no social life, no extracurricular activities other than sailing. But sailing was my joy. Funny story though, when we were racing for that final regatta where we were in the North American Championships, we had survived all the regattas leading up to that and hadn't been eliminated, and we were sailing, and we had raced several very hard days of heavy weather, and it was an 8-race series, and we had 2 races to go, and no, we only had 1 race to go, last race, and we broke for lunch, and there was 3 women on the boat, myself and 2 others, and I was foredeck. The girl that was middle, she and I got off and told our coach and the skipper's parents that we were never getting back on that boat again. And we were tied for first place. After what for me was a 4-year journey, for Ruthie, the middle girl, she'd been trying for 11 years and Ellen had been trying for 15. And but sailing with women is hard. And sailing at that level and for that long at that amount of stress, everybody's was at their breaking point. And so our coach, who John Collius, who went on to win a silver medal that year in the Olympics in Solings, had a flight to catch, but he was basically told by Ellen's father that you have to get those girls to agree to get back on that boat before you can go catch your plane. So he did, and I had the good fortune after 40 years of not seeing him to catch up with him last Sunday, which was super. And he reminded us what we had done to get there, and that we could just do a little bit more, kind of a Thomas and Edison talk. If you just keep trying one more time, you'll get there. And also in that moment, my mother, who had been diagnosed with cancer 2 years before and battling it and losing the battle, I didn't expect to see either parent, which was kind of unusual for a 16-year-old girl sailing in the highest level regatta possible in the United States at that time. Women didn't sail in the Olympics in 1976. And sure enough, Mother rallied, Dad got her on a plane, they got to the bar of the yacht club right before the beginning of the last race. And we were jockeying around. If any of you all have ever watched the old America's Cup when they sailed monohulls, they would do what's called dogging. And it's a game of ballet and intimidation with boats. And so we were doing that with the Canadian team, who we were tied with. And at one point, the South Carolina team came up a little close, and I think rattled the Canadians just enough that we were able to force them over the line early. We took the lead and won the regatta by 8 points. And my parents were in the bar listening to this over the radio, the blow by blow that they were giving from the race committee, from the dial up, as they call it, before the start through the whole race. Goosebumps. Extraordinary experiences. Getting to sail with legends. So, my own brother actually was the navigator for America Cubed in 1972 when they won the America's Cup. And I got to go out and take my young son to watch them, which was exciting. And when we went to leave was when the King violence was happening in LA, Rodney King, and we got on our plane and they announced that we could get back off if we didn't want to go to LA because they were shooting at planes from the airport in LA. So I go from this amazing sailing thing immediately to, life again in a deeper, darker way. And gee, doesn't the last year and a half feel like that? You go from whatever personal victory you accomplish to get through the moment of the latest heartbreaking headline, whether it be weather or people or whatever. And some of these paintings and the darker ones back home in the studio reflect that. So sometimes the painting is about my experience. So my mother used to call it Mother's Day. When she wanted to go sailing, it had to be 10 to 12 knots of breeze and sunny and just the right temperature and beautiful, and that was when you could get her out sailing. Since I painted that painting, in the last 6 months, some of my paintings have gotten a bit darker. One that is particularly strong and powerful, I'd like to think is dark because of my volunteering at the House of Refuge and my learning about the George's Valentine wreck and admiring the way the beautiful crystal water breaks on the Anastasia Rock every time I'm there. And that's kind of what it is. It's like the background is dark, but what's in the foreground coming at you is this beautiful crystal clear turquoise and pale blue wave, which is a wonderful juxtaposition for visually to see that beautiful light blue on the dark brown rock, but also in life how many things were dark, but then you brought them to the light, or they spurred you to go find the light. So some of my escapes were going to art school. At 14, I had a cousin come visit. He helped my dad bring a boat down the coast. And after about 24 hours, he looked at me and he said, "You have to leave." I was like, "What?" And he said, "You have to get out of here. Go to military school, go to art school, go wherever, but get the heck out of here." So I did. At 14, I moved to Houston, rented an apartment, got admitted into the high school for performing and visual arts, and learned there what they wanted to teach me, and that was awesome. Then due to my parents' health, I had to go back. But by that time I was so geared up into the sailing and practicing for the Adams Cup that I just put the other stuff aside, you know, I just dealt with it. I found a way to deal with it, and then I went and did these bigger, better things. So some of my stories are beautiful and happy and perfect, and some of my stories are somewhere in the middle. Like Into the Abyss, the title is more foreboding than the actual painting. But it's not as calm and frilly and happy as maybe Gilbert's Bar. As a licensed boat captain, I have been a lot of different places, and some repetitively. For instance, in 2018, I did 10,000 miles of boat deliveries. And so staring at the GPS and the charts and whatnot, different areas stand out to me. And every time I had to run from a storm and I was anywhere around North South Carolina, I often would have to go into Georgetown to either get on the inside waterway or for the night to take shelter, whatever. And so this is my mental image of the inlet from what's called Long Bay, which is just a divot from the Atlantic, into Winnea Bay, which leads, you can go left and go wiggle through a bunch of intercoastal creeks and eddies, or you can go right and go up the Waccamaw River and toward North Carolina, or you can kind of go straight and end up in Georgetown, South Carolina. But having to take refuge in that particular inlet many times. This one is my memory of a place called Hell's Gate, which is, there's several Hell's Gates in the United States, especially on the East Coast, There's one up near Long Island. This one is, if you will, Hilton Head, Calabogie Sound, and through Georgia. And why there's not 10 in Georgia, I've called Hell's Gate, I don't know, because let's just say if you don't have to, you don't go that way. If you can skip it and go offshore, you do. But so some of my paintings are relevant to places and specific emotions I felt in those places. Others are memories, like the one back in the corner of night sailing. When I first, the first 10, 15 years of my life, that I was sailing, my sailing life, I loved night sailing. The stars are amazing, the calm, the peace. Now we call it terror time. Part of that is because as you get older, you get a better sense of mortality. And what you thought was not a big deal at 13 when you're sailing through a hurricane across the Gulf of Mexico without your family, that wasn't near as scary as 5 years later going through a really bad squall with your dad in the Gulf of Mexico when the anemometer blew off at 80 miles an hour and the seas were as big as the ones in the movie The Perfect Storm. Funny aside, I was watching that movie with some friends and the guy who was projecting said, "Oh, that's so fake," and I was in the fetal position, shaking and crying, and my husband was trying to calm me down, and he was going, "Are you okay?" I went, "That's not fake. That's exactly what that looks like." So, anyway, good news is I've survived all of those crazy things because obviously it wasn't my time, and I had things to do. One of which I think is to warn people about sea level rise. And hopefully there's so many people working in so many ways to try and save our oceans. There's the kid, boy in Slat, who as a teenager for one of his high school projects started trying to design a way to solve the Pacific garbage patch cleanup. He is now in his 20s and is succeeding. His efforts have led into multi-million dollars worth of money being raised and ships being deployed that are out there with these special catches and the catching garbage is not hard. Not catching the critters is what is hard. And so I follow that along, and I'm so happy because he reminds me of being that little girl in Galveston Bay wishing I could figure out how to get that sledge off the bottom without killing the oysters. But this is also a lifelong journey for me because Seabrook, Texas, as I said before, was surrounded by water and often underwater, and at some point after I left, they actually sacrificed about a third of the town to a spillway, so that maybe the rest of the town would survive. And I had friends send me pictures of how high the water got during the last hurricane, and it's better, but I don't know that it's solved, and given the storms keep getting more egregious. We need to worry about that. There are studies that in Miami and the upper and lower Keys, there are areas that if something doesn't change, they will be permanently inundated. These are areas with houses on them where people live right now. That won't be just a lunar tide thing or a storm thing, but a 365-day-a-year thing. So, yes, we all wanna live on the coast because we wanna be close to the water, and the 10 years I lived on a boat, that didn't bother me that it was rising because, I was on a boat. Boats rise. But now I'm not. So I don't even live in a flood zone, and last year I actually got flood insurance because of the rains in spring of 2019. Our lawn was underwater for over a month. So I pay a lot of attention. If I'm on a boat, I'm looking at the sky, I'm looking at the water, I'm looking at the surface tension. I can tell you where it's shallow, where it's deep, where the current is, which direction it's going, which is stronger. I can look at the clouds and tell you which side to go on if you want the lift and the puff. Don't sail through the middle, it will be dead. But it's also watching the environment, and yes, it's easy to get overwhelmed with all the news and all of that, so I try and be very particular into what streams I tap into, and typically try to go for the more scientific papers versus news, mainstream news media, because that'll make me crazy. So, part of my paintings are about documenting my sea stories. Some are about my passion for the ocean. Some are trying to document places that people don't even know about unless they are from that area. The flower gardens, which are 100 miles south of Galveston, are one of the most beautiful coral reef systems in the world, and in a place most people don't expect them. And there's several, because the main one goes a fair good distance, and then there's Stetson Bank, which is just off of that. And some of the issues that have happened in the Gulf of Mexico obviously are a problem. A bigger problem is overfishing. Apparently it is now being determined that worse than plastic and oil pollution is overfishing for the corals. Temperature rise doesn't help, but without the fish there to nibble on the things they need to nibble on, and then the byproduct of that nourishing the corals, they are at a higher risk for things we didn't even understand. So I want everybody to love the oceans as much as I do. I want them to realize that not only just looking at them brings, it's documented that it brings physiological health and mental health, but also we rely on the water on the planet for so many things: drinking, washing, fish, nourishing our gardens as well as our bodies. And if we don't all have we're all stakeholders, whether you realize it or not. And as powerful as the waves born on a hurricane are, the ocean is powerless against us. So that is my passions, both, all, how it happened. Any questions?
By just saying, this is wonderful because of the water level coming up. The representation is what I'm saying,
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
So, a sailing community I reached out to get nautical charts donated, because a lot of people don't use them anymore, but they're really hard to let go of because they're just so sexy. I reached out to a sailing racing blog, and they published this project in it, and the number of people surprised me from Annapolis that want their own grouping so they can put them on display in Annapolis, help me find a place and promote it. And then people started reaching out from Manhattan and all up and down the eastern seaboard and the Gulf of Mexico. So these are my Florida kids, but I have 3 in the studio waiting for their Annapolis charts, and then of course Charleston, South Carolina goes under often. Seabrook, Texas was ridiculous under where I'm from. Southport, North Carolina would go, you'd have to wear your big high rubber boots to go out to eat on a lunar high tide. And sometimes that wasn't enough. We made a point of wearing the white shrimper boots to when our favorite band was playing at one of the places you had to wait to. Teresa?
Would you share with us some of your experiences sailing in storms?
Certainly. So, The first one was sailing at 13, I had the opportunity to jump aboard a boat sailing back from Veracruz, Mexico to Texas. And this was 1972, so obviously we didn't have all the fancy weather and communications. We didn't have GPS, we didn't have any of those things. And so we set out with a group of boats there had been a sailboat race from Texas to Mexico, and we were helping bring the boats back to Texas. And the boat, I was on a 40-footer with a gentleman and his 3 kids, one of the kids' girlfriends, and me and another lady. And we stopped in Tuxpan, Mexico for a scheduled stop, and then we were heading back to Corpus Christi, Texas. We'd given up our papers, our money, passports, whatever. And the biggest boat in the fleet, which was 48 foot, so he had the tallest mast, so he could get the best radio conversations, heard about a hurricane that was entering the Gulf of Mexico on the other side, on the east side, near Cuba. We were all the way on the west side. And there was quite an argument back and forth and decisions and change decisions about what to do on our boat. Most of us did not want to go in. We knew that the way hurricanes move, if they move slow, we had plenty of time to get to Corpus before a really bad storm hit. If they move fast, they don't get as volatile, typically, and so it wouldn't be as bad. But either way, it would be hard for it to catch us if we just went, and we had enough food and drink to get to where we were planned to go. Well, there was somebody on the boat who disagreed, and we ended up going into Tampico, Mexico, where we were surrounded by naval gunboats and written up dead at sea in 2 Mexican newspapers. Meanwhile, the hurricane's coming. The Mexican government would not let us off the boat. They wouldn't let us leave. We tried to leave. At one point, they shot armament over the bow. We turned back. We went and sat quietly at the dock and waited. Finally, they said, okay, we've had enough of you. You've got to go. And you can imagine what happened. We went out, and about nightfall, it started. We were in the outer bands, and it's interesting to me. One of the things in thinking about this talk is trying to recall some of these storm stories, and there are, at some point in the story, my knowledge or memory just stops, which I'm guessing is a self-surviving mechanism. I remember it as being very unpleasant. I remember holding on for dear life. I remember losing our radio, being knocked about so bad that the compass didn't seem to be correct anymore. We lost our Loran navigation system, and we pretty much, the fact we didn't lose the rig was pretty surprising, or anybody overboard, although, you know, like I say, we were holding on pretty well. And when we came out of it, of course, we were in the post-hurricane doldrums. And the next night, we're sailing and we see a bunch of lights, and we're really hoping it's Brownsville, Texas, and it was a Cuban fishing fleet. At which point we didn't know where the hell we were. And I believe it was the night after that we saw lights again, and we hoped it was Port Aransas, which was where we were thought we were aiming for, and it was Brownsville, which meant we had another day to sail. So after being a month away from the country as a 13-year-old girl, that was quite the adventure.
How big was the boat?
It was a Cal 40. So the good news is, back then, when they built fiberglass boats, they built them so big and thick because they had no idea how strong fiberglass is. You move to, that was 72, that boat was probably built in 69. The boats built in 79 were way too lightweight and brittle, and that's when they had the Fastnet horrible storm come through, and a bunch of racing sailors died. Luckily none of my friends did, but it was a very tragic thing, and it was because they, at that point then, underestimated or overestimated the strength of carbon fiber. So the materials, after they switched from wood and steel, have, you know, it's a testing ground. And, so when my husband and I bought a sailboat, we bought a 1967 Islander 37 because it was built like the boat I sailed through the hurricane in. And it was also the same model boat that the head of NASA during the Apollo program, Dr. Gilruth, purchased. And I figured he's a pretty smart guy, so it's probably good.
Yeah.
But it was old. How are we doing on time? We're about there. So there's more sea stories and storm stories if you all come back on October 28th or catch me at the Palmer Mark Gallery whenever I'm volunteering there.
Jane, just thank you so much for making the parallel between your life and experience and adventure to your interpretation and your art. Thank you.
It's a big old muddy stew.
Good job.
I can't thank you all enough. I have goosebumps.
Thank you.